Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's Telehealth Secrets with our special guest, Roy Huggins. Just a few housekeeping announcements before you get started. My name is Ann. You can't see me, but maybe I can get a show of hands first if everyone can hear okay. So you should be able to see a hand raising thing. So we got, okay, great. Sounds like we're doing okay on hearing. All right, so just a reminder that this session will be recorded and the slides are available in the handout section right now if you want to download them, and they'll also be made available in the next few days. Please submit your questions via chat. We'll be answering them at the end, and if we can, we'll answer them during. We have a bunch of staff back here. And also, please check out our past webinars. We have really good stuff on malpractice, coding and billing, and telepsychiatry and stuff like that. So, and with that, let me go ahead and give the time over to Milton.
Okay, thanks, Anne. By the way, thank you so much, everyone. So welcome to this week's Telehealth Secrets. My name is Milton Chen, I'm the CEO of VSee. And for the people who have not joined us before, so we're the telehealth company behind a lot of the big brands like Optum, McKesson, a bunch of others. And so this week, I'm really excited to welcome our guest this week. So he's a longtime VSee user and one of the pioneers in telehealth. And I think a lot of you guys have seen his writings, and he's just extremely influential. So he's a founder of Person-Centered Tech, Roy Higgins. So Roy is a web developer turned counselor and now directs a Person-Centered Tech. Again, he's one of the person uniquely starting from the technology and blending into a counselor and into this, which is very unique, I think, perspective on this thing. Again, I think his insight on how do you actually create an online practice, how do you grow a clinician's understanding of the internet and these were like electronic communication mediums for this practice of the future, I think will be really, really insightful. So we're super lucky to have him. And one of the fun facts about him is that he has actually performed at Carnegie Health before.
Yes,
so,
I have.
Can you tell us, just maybe start that out, just tell us about that. So.
Yeah, I love giving that as my fun fact because if people go, what? It's in college, I went to Grinnell College in the mid 90s, and 1995 was the 150th anniversary of the state of Iowa, where Grinnell is. And so my college choir, the Grinnell Singers, performed a piece by my advisor at Carnegie Hall and also at the Des Moines Symphony Hall at Celebration of the State. It was great. It was awesome.
That is awesome.
It was actually incredible, to be honest, but yes. Yeah, but it's also a fun story.
Okay, now you're bragging.
Yeah, right? No, it's a brag.
That's just like a big honor, big wonderful. How about, Roy, how about I'll turn the floor to you and maybe you could just share some of your insight with the audience.
Sounds good. I have a neat little slide deck here. I'll just go through that and we'll get talking and doing questions. So this is top 10 tips for running your online therapy practice. This is supposed to present for about 10 to 15 minutes and then have time for Q&A, which I think is a great way to do it. And so this is a very packed slide deck. So I won't really get into exploring everything I look at because I want it to be a useful reference for you all. And I know Anne has put it in the handouts piece in your control panel, so you can download it right now. And I'm sure there'll be other ways to get it too if you don't find it there. So let's talk about that. What are we gonna talk about? Teletherapy. That I have noticed, by the way, is during the COVID times emerging as the word people are using to refer to doing therapy, psychotherapy, counseling, the various terms via telehealth. Telebehavioral health, telemental health, online counseling, distance counseling, telepsychology. I think Jay Ostrowski did a survey once and found like 42 different terms being used for this. And I have discovered, and I didn't expect this, that in the COVID times, the big emerging word was teletherapy. So that's what I call it now. That's what I'm going to say, teletherapy. All right, we're going to talk about choosing tech, HIPAA and security, informed consent with teletherapy, cross-state practice, setting up a program for telebehavioral health or teletherapy, and what's going on with the COVID times. a little bit about what's different now and some ethical considerations you might want to think about as we're exiting the COVID times, because starting to think about it now could be important. All right, so get into that. What we won't talk about, just to make sure you understand, because the telebehavioral health includes these things, but I don't talk about them. Things specific to psychiatry, like teleprescribing. I don't even want to try to touch that. Milton could probably tell you some things. Billing and coding for telebehavioral health. Not that I don't know anything about it, but I'm not an expert and I'd rather not try to advise. But I've got a link here to a fantastic video that the Simple Practice folks did that just really laid it out really clearly. So I also don't see a reason to repeat their wheel invention there. Just click that and it's a great video. It'll explain almost everything. If that doesn't explain everything you know, also check out, Medicare has guides for billing and they will explain how to do Medicare teletherapy billing as well. It's actually, the billing and coding is pretty straightforward. The thing that gets complicated is how every different insurance plan wants to do everything differently. That's where things get complicated. And the only thing a person like me can tell you there is ask them, which is not very fun, but it is what you got to do.
Yeah, by the way, we actually, just for the audience member, we also have one of the earliest speaker we had on the show is actually on the deep dive into, he actually shared with some of the common mistakes and so on. And the good news is he's also available for consulting service if you want to. So we definitely highly recommend, just like you want to take care of the payment piece, they're not then.
I highly recommend that too then. That's perfect. Yeah, right, that's not my wheel. So, okay.
Maybe
All right.
I can pass the link to for the audience members, that particular.
Yeah, so choosing tech. So when you're choosing tech, we are focusing on the idea of online therapy, teletherapy through video conferencing. And this matters because if you start to really study teletherapy and telemental health, what you discover is that there's actually a huge well of opportunities for ways you could deliver healthcare and deliver psychological services and care to people. Getting into working with avatars in an avatar space, or the ways in which you can get out of that box of just having like a 45 or 50-minute session where you just do counseling. There's so many things you can do with this concept of a technology-assisted therapy and teletherapy. That's just this huge world that we as a field are still not really ready to enter. But people who are really specialized in teletherapy may be there. But the reasons why we focus on just video conferencing, like I do with VSee, is one, it's what Medicare has done all the research on, and they feel confident about it. And there's a lot of research that makes us feel confident about it as a medium for delivering the kind of therapy modalities and skills we already learn in school. Because in school, we're learning something focused on the idea of sitting in a room across from somebody and talking to them, and that being how we deliver care primarily. And so video conferencing is a functional equivalent, a telehealth functional equivalent of the classic therapy medium that we are trained in. And so I think that's a big part of why it became that kind of gold standard for how we do things. Hopefully over time, the whole field will start to really get into the fact that there's so much more possibility there. But certainly it does make sense that as we start and we try to get everybody in therapy starting to work with tech-assisted therapy and remote therapy, that we start with video conferencing. Although many would argue we should start with phone sessions, but that's a whole other question because of insurance coverage for phone sessions and such in regular times. I'll have a slide later about how that is better covered during COVID times. So based on that, video conferencing, that's what we're doing. The hardware in general you want to think about is computers with monitors. And I discourage you from using small screens. A thing I'm seeing a lot during the COVID emergency is people depending on tablets like iPads and even worse, smartphones for delivering care. There are a lot of reasons why that's not the best idea. The most convincing one for me is that research on clinical effectiveness indicates that you're most likely to be able to accurately assess a person's mental status and affect with a monitor that's at least 20 or 22 inches, depending on how you measure the size of the monitor, right? The original research on this actually said 16 inches, but that's back when monitors were almost square shaped, like 4x3. These days they're more 16 by 9, they're more letterbox shaped. So the letterbox version of that is like a 20 or 22-inch monitor. I am on such a monitor right now talking to you, and it's how I see all my clients. Sometimes I use a 15-inch laptop monitor, and that does all right, especially with clients that I already know well. I have a strong understanding of what's going on for them, especially if you're seeing someone new. Big monitor, even bigger is better. The idea of small monitors and small screens, I know we love our mobile devices, but we want to consider that's not as clinically effective, right? There are a lot of mitigating factors there that you want to learn about as you learn more about telehealth and teletherapy, but your baseline is big monitor that really lets you see your client. And of course, you want webcams and microphones. Sometimes one device does both things well. Since I'm talking about having you get a monitor, you would need a webcam. People ask about the webcam that's built into their computer. Sometimes those are great and it works fine, but you want to test them in different environments. Like for example, we have found that the camera built into MacBooks has a tendency to create a lot of tracers on people on the screen. And you may not really notice that until you're trying to really do therapy to standard of care on a sizable monitor, and you realize that you're actually kind of, they say that you're actually kind of fuzzy as you move around. You don't notice these things when you're just talking to your friends on Skype or doing other things that the general public does with video conferencing. When you start to really get discriminating and really high professional about how you're doing therapy over video, and you start looking for the little differences that help kind of make the video disappear so that you're engaging directly with the person, you notice that those little differences in quality can really mess things up. I mean, it's not going to ruin your therapy, but it does put more of a barrier in, and you want to remove barriers. Like we're trying to do everything we can to remove anything that gets in the way of the direct human-to-human connection through video. So that's part of why I do encourage you to look into just having an external webcam and potentially asking clients about that as well. But also I should say, the new iPad cameras are amazing, right? So like some people use an iPad Pro, which is a nice big screen, has an amazing camera, and they set it up well and it works fine. So I want to make sure I do acknowledge that. But in general, you want to be thoughtful about the quality of your hardware and how it actually impacts your ability to remove the tech as a barrier or a thing that distracts and catches attention when you're trying to connect from human to human. And the other is lights. Get lights. Like have a light that shines on your face. If you do therapy in front of a window and you have natural light on your face, awesome, but you can't rely on that. It gets cloudy or you have to see someone late in the day, the weather changes, the seasons change. Having lights that you can shine, it can be a really big difference. And of course, when you're modeling to your client, good lighting and cameras that really bring across a clear picture, they're more likely to follow your instructions with saying, hey, can we get I need to see you clearly. There's shadows in your eyes and around your nose that make it harder for me to really know what's going on with you. Is there a way to get yourself in front of a light? That's a useful thing. So that's like your basic hardware. Software services, you of course need video conferencing software such as VSee, which is what I use. You need electronic payment, and you need secure email and or texting usually. Like you need something for communicating between sessions. If you're doing fine with a telephone, great, that's no problem. But usually clients need more, or you need more, that's usually textual. And so some kind of secure communication between sessions is useful. VSee has in it secure messaging. I know people who use the VSee app on their phones to actually message with clients. That's not usually how the VSee app is used, but it can be used that way, by the way. I often use Signal with my clients, but I would only recommend Signal for solo practices. If you have a group practice or agency, I wouldn't recommend using Signal because it's really hard to, it's impossible literally to maintain discoverability of data, which you need when you have to be compliant with HIPAA. And if you're a public agency, you usually need discoverability in order to comply with your government's rules and laws. So Signal would not be an option there, but for solo practices, Signal can be great because Signal is a nice open source free secure texting option. And of course, if you and your clients are already using VSee together anyways, you could use the VSee app. Those are great ways to have secure textual communication with each other. So speaking of security, let's talk about HIPAA. So the first thing I want to make sure everyone knows about HIPAA, and this is really important, is that HIPAA security compliance, like being HIPAA compliant, is not related to what software you choose, or it is related, but it's not about that at all. right? There's no such thing as a product that's HIPAA compliant. And I know actually VSee used to advertise as HIPAA secure, the phrase I like to use. I'm sure the reason they'll say HIPAA compliant is because that's what people are looking for. People want the product to say HIPAA compliant on the website. And I think this is true of the vast majority of products that we as therapists use, is that they'll put the word HIPAA compliant on their website because that's what we've been told to look for. But many companies know better that, and I know Milton's always been very good about this. It's one of the reasons I've always been a fan of VSee, is that VSee and Milton have always been very good about trying to make sure that people who use their software understand that being HIPAA compliant is more than just picking the right software, although picking the right software is a big part of that. When you see that a software product that involves a service, usually a cloud service, when you see this HIPAA compliant phrase on their website, what that usually means, and what you're hoping it means, is that they will execute with you HIPAA business associate agreements. Right? And that's actually been one of the big pieces of history between VSee and the mental health community, is that VSee was willing to execute business associate agreements, even on the free tier of their software, going way back. That changed with the huge changes with COVID, which is completely understandable, and that's a whole new thing. But for years there, that was a big part of VSee giving to the community, was being like, we will do this because it's what you need. It's the right thing, and it's how a service vendor helps with HIPAA security compliance for us. But it's not the whole thing, because complying with HIPAA is actually a whole process, an ongoing process that we do. And I think a thing for both solo therapists and group practice therapists that we often kind of need to understand, we're not told, we're not taught in school, and it's really hard to get anyone to tell us this at all, is that complying with HIPAA is basically a business process. It's an organizational business process, right? It's not really, it's not like an ethical thing. Like, I just finished teaching my 7th year of teaching counseling ethics at Portland State University's counseling program. And when I teach ethics, students want to know about HIPAA compliance. And the big thing I note with the students is, we were just talking about ethics, which is like an aspect of professionalism. It's very philosophical, right? As well as being very practical. It's something that we do a lot of discussion about, and you try to like unpack things, understand things. HIPAA is a regulation. The way HIPAA is written, it assumes that this philosophical concept of ethics is really just not in the cards at all, right? HIPAA assumes that someone in your practice is there to run the organization. Like, someone like picks tech and picks processes and designs policies, and yada yada. HIPAA is written on the assumption that your practice has someone doing that stuff. And so it's written for that person. It says, okay, you, the person who runs the organization, these are the things your organization needs to do. These are policies and procedures you need to have. And here are the things that those policies and procedures need to make sure you're doing. Here are the updates and like upkeep things you're supposed to do. And so HIPAA has a privacy rule, which most of us are more familiar with, and it's the realm of attorneys. And you have to have privacy policies. These are written policies about how you do privacy practices. You need to have a notice of privacy practices. We often call it the HIPAA form, which is that document you get the clients that tells them what your privacy practices are. And you need to, by the way, post your notice on your website. If you have a website, post your HIPAA form there. And there's other stuff there too, but that's that. And then there's a security rule, which works very differently. That's generally the realm of information security technicians, and that's where I work. When people talk about me being a HIPAA expert, I'm a HIPAA security rule expert. I know enough about the privacy rule to be dangerous, but basically I know enough in order to make the security stuff work. And like what person-centered tech does is primarily the security and tech standards. And to comply with the security rule, you have to perform a security risk analysis, develop risk mitigation plans, and write security policies and procedures based on your risk analysis. If you haven't done those things, your practice is not HIPAA compliant. All right, I'm going to say that again. No matter what products you use, including the excellent VSee, right? If you haven't done these things, your practice is not HIPAA compliant. Right? HIPAA compliance requires doing these things. And in the process of doing these things according to HIPAA standards, you will choose services like VSee that are HIPAA friendly and HIPAA secure. They give you business associate agreements and such like that, right? And you will make policies and procedures for how you use those services in a way that maintains your HIPAA compliance. All right. Luckily, most video conferencing services like VSee, using them in a way that matches your HIPAA compliance is pretty easy. Like there's not a lot of complexity there, which is nice. But for example, using a product like Google G Suite, which can offer you HIPAA-friendly email, is pretty complicated. But using that in a HIPAA compliant way actually requires some procedures, because even though Google will give you a HIPAA business associate agreement when you get G Suite, if you send an email from your HIPAA friendly G Suite, it's still just an email. Like it's still not secure, right? So at that point, the fact that it's HIPAA friendly and how you use the HIPAA friendliness gets complicated, right? So there's differences from the services you use in how HIPAA compliance is or isn't complicated when you use it. All right, informed consent. So that's HIPAA compliance. That's the whole thing right there. I told you in 5 minutes. All right, so informed consent. Most states or licensing boards actually require you give special informed consent for telehealth. Some of them actually define things that have to go into your informed consent. The American Counseling Association and National Association of Social Workers, ACA and ASW, their codes of ethics require special informed consent. I know the ACA code actually has items that must go into your informed consent if you're going to do telehealth. We have at Person-Centered Tech, we have a free sample of the informed consent document we made for our telemental health certificate program. You can go download it. When COVID came along, we realized everyone needed that really fast, so we just released it for free. You can go to our front page and you can find it there in our COVID-19 telehealth resources. The informed consent document for telehealth, one that actually covers all the things you might need to cover, it's pretty long. It's a few pages. You might be surprised at how much stuff you need to add to your informed consent that's just for the teletherapy. But if you go read it, trust me, it will all start to make sense. You'll start to realize, oh yeah, of course you would need to do that, or that makes sense, that a client would need to know that that's what's going to happen. All right, so go check out ours. It'll make a good reference, and of course you can use it in your practice. The one we have is suitable for solo practices and for group practices, so please use it in good health. It's available for everyone to use. Cross-state practice is always, it's the biggest thing we try to talk to people about all the time, and it's always evolving, which is interesting. So the real important thing to know about cross-state practice is that licensing boards exist to protect their public, not to support us. That is not the purpose of a licensing board. Like a licensing board doesn't care about us or our needs. Well, that's probably not entirely true, the people do, but the organization doesn't, right? Like that's not what they're there for, right? So they're there to protect their public, and that's why the kind of weirdness of cross-state practice makes more sense in light of that. And so that's why we've ended up with this situation where the thing that determines the laws when you have a cross-state session is primarily the client's location at the time of session. And the reason I say that is that wherever the client is physically located, like that licensing board gets to decide whether or not it's legal to work with that person. Like I'm in Oregon, I'm in Portland, Oregon. I know Milton's in California, not far away, right? It is not unreasonable for one of my clients to take a trip down to the Bay Area where I know Milton is nearby, and they may want to do a session while they're on vacation. Well, they're in California, and the California Counseling Board, because I'm a counselor and I do counseling, they're going to have a say about that. And in fact, I happen to know that what they will say about that is you may not do it. They will say that I will be breaking California law if I do my counseling session with that client while they're in the Bay Area. That's just the way it is. And they also, during the COVID emergency, they have not changed that. However, if that same client took a trip to Phoenix, Arizona, the sunny state of Arizona, this client likes to go sunny places. Oregon's not usually a sunny place, right? They go to Arizona. I go look up the counseling board rules for Arizona, for the counseling board, because I'm a counselor. And they actually give me permission to work with that person temporarily. They actually give me a lot of permission. They're really permissive with allowing me to continue working with that person while they travel in Arizona. I've looked up the law, I document that I did, and I do my session with that client. So it's not just that you can't practice across states. It's that wherever the client is and wherever you are, has jurisdiction on the session. And so the things with enforcement power is where is the client physically located? Where is the clinician licensed? and where is the clinician physically located. So I'm licensed in Oregon. I'm in Portland, Oregon. If you're not familiar, Portland, Oregon is right next to the state of Washington. We're like up against the border. I can go right across the river into southern Washington. Let's say I'm visiting my aunt who lives there, and I want to see my clients from there. Technically speaking, I'm in Washington. If the state of Washington wants to tell me, hey, we have jurisdiction over your session because you're here, here's what you have to do, they can do that. So can Oregon, because I'm licensed there, and that's the license I'm working with. And let's say my client is in Arizona, so Arizona has a say as well, right? Is it messy? Yes. Is it American? Yes, it is all American. It is the grassroots governance that America is built on, has some ups and downs, and this is one of the downs of how that goes. Things like that are changing. If you're not familiar with SIPACT, if you're a psychologist, you should know about SIPACT. SIPACT is basically it's been years in the making, and it's going to activate on July 1st. So we're recording this on June 11th, right? In a couple weeks, few weeks, this is going to go active. The details we don't know, but there are a growing number of states that are part of the SIPACT. And if you're a psychologist in a state, licensed in a state, I should say, that does the SIPACT, then you'll have the ability to go pass an exam under ASPBB, which I believe is the same exam you take just to get the ASPBB letters after your name, if you want to do that. If you pass that, you can apply for what's called the e-passport. And the e-passport is a special certification under the SIPACT that lets you do telepsychology anywhere in the entire SIPACT, any state in the SIPACT. There are currently, I think, 13 states in the SIPACT, and a couple more are coming in, including Washington, which I referenced earlier, which is a big deal, by the way. So if you're in a SIPACT state and you're a psychologist, lucky you, right? That'll definitely help change things about this. So here are must-use resources. If you're looking at cross-state practice, which right now you probably are, because everyone is gone home for quarantine, the Epstein-Becker-Green survey is super valuable. This is an app from a national law firm called Epstein-Becker-Green. Every couple of years, they update the survey of telemental health laws for all the professions that do telemental health, including psychiatry and nurse practitioners, and several others as well. Look up your profession, the state where your client is, and they'll help you find the law. Also, Person-Centered Tech, my company, has our own survey that's slightly different from the Epstein-Becker-Green. You can go to personcenteredtech.com and see that. It's a survey of the emergency rules, the COVID emergency rules, and the evergreen all the time rules for temporary practice. So temporary out-of-state practice. So if you got a client who's traveling, you want to find out if temporary out-of-state practice is currently permitted where they go check out our survey. It will tell you about that. And ours, we are trying to continuously update. All right, so if you guys have a program, how you do it? If you're a solo practitioner, primarily you go check out the stuff I said earlier. This is for a group practice or agency. We strongly recommend, through a lot of experience with building programs with agencies and building programs with group practices, especially group private practices, we've done a lot of those, really recommend having a procedure manual and a policy manual for your telehealth program. And the reason we like that is it can really eliminate the amount of extra training and work your clinicians have to do if the manual tells them all the things you're going to do. Like if you define, this is the tech we're going to use, we're getting the software that we're going to use and we're going to supply it to everybody. We're going to have standards for hardware. We're going to have standards for making sure everybody's prepared to work on camera skillfully, using the on-camera skills that we want to learn. And we're going to have a standard for how we handle, time of session documentation and psychological safety assessment and appropriateness assessment, which are all standards of care for telehealth. We have a standard for dealing with cross-jurisdiction. We have a standard for, if a client is in a state that requires us to do a risk assessment or other assessments before we start telehealth, which some states require that. They probably don't during the COVID emergency, but they may require it again after the COVID emergency. It just defines all that. So people don't have to be taking new classes or studying something new or figuring out a whole new way of doing things every time a client moves around, which happens a lot when you're doing a telehealth program. You just have a manual that lays it all out. We really strongly recommend that. And as you can probably guess, we do sell those. Yes, we do. But I also strongly recommend it if you can make your own. Either way, trust me, it'll save a lot of time. Because for teletherapy, the kind of standard for continuing education program to get a therapist from not really knowing anything about it to being qualified to do teletherapy, the standard for that is anywhere between 12 and 15 hours, depending on which organization you're looking at. Like NBCC's program is 12 hours. That's the VSee TMHP, the board certified telemental health provider. That's 12 hours. But AMFTRB, which is the Marriage and Family Research Board, so that's like Marriage and Family Licensing Boards Association, they have a really great document about what they see as the standards for a marriage and family therapist to do telehealth, and they recommend a program of 15 hours. So like in Louisiana and Texas, the Marriage and Family Board requires everyone has 15 hours of training before they're allowed to do teletherapy, for example, right? That all makes sense in the context of assuming the thing we tend to assume in mental health, which is the assumption that the clinician is operating on their own. Like even if they're in a group practice or agency, the assumption is that the clinician does everything for themselves and doesn't learn new things, or sorry, doesn't let someone else teach them or take care of stuff. They're supposed to know everything themselves. They'd be like an island. And in that case, 12 to 15 hours makes a lot of sense to me. Like our certificate program is 17 hours, right? You know, we really see that there's a lot to learn there. But in an agency or group practice, you can actually eliminate the need for a lot of that training by figuring this stuff out for the clinicians. Because even in our certificate program, like 12 hours of our program is logistical stuff. You know, it's technology choices. It's how you do across-state practice stuff. It's all these issues that you can predefine for your clinicians. And when the issue comes up for them, a supervisor can help them make a decision. So the clinician doesn't have to be an independent expert on telehealth. They just need to know how to deliver care skillfully through the video. Like that's all they really need to learn to do if all the logistical stuff is taken care of by the practice. Right? So like we found in our setup, the supervisors take like this, 12 to 17 hour program. They take the full program, but then clinicians only need 3 or 4 hours because that's how long it takes to deliver trainings on being effective on camera, clinically effective on camera, and the kind of things the clinician needs to know legally and ethically for when they're working with someone who's remote. It's a much shorter program than doing a full certificate program. Now, of course, this model doesn't work in every state because, for example, Louisiana and Texas MFTs have to take 15 hours. They can't be given a shortened program. But in a lot of the cases, you can do that. And it really makes your program a lot more efficient, a lot more uniform. We find doing that really helps a lot, right? Really, it helps clinicians who are not very tech savvy feel confident. You know, they have a uniformity. They know who to talk to and ask questions to. They can talk to their colleagues about what they're doing because everyone's doing the same program. If they're doing everything the same way, according to the manual, it's much easier to get support and help people feel supported. And of course, research indicates that one of the biggest factors in the success of technology-assisted therapy is the therapist's own attitude towards the tech you're using. And when you can help your clinicians feel confident about using tech because you've given them this kind of safe container of practices and procedures, they tend to perform better. That's just our anecdotal experience. But we also recommend that you decide on what hardware people are going to use and what services people are going to use and like assign them. Okay, lastly, the emergency considerations for COVID time. So a lot of states are opening up for out-of-state licensees. So like not every state, for example, California did not decide to do that for counselors, MFTs, and social workers. Neither did Washington. No, I'm not bitter, not at all. But most of the American states have done emergency declarations, usually a executive order from the governor, sometimes a special decision from the Department of Health that opens up practice to people in other states during the emergency so that we can deliver care to those places. So there is a temporary heavy openness in terms of being able to practice across state lines. But something you want to consider there in terms of like ethical considerations is, should you take a new client from out of state if it will eventually become illegal to work with that client? Well, so for example, Wisconsin is an example, it just came to my mind. Wisconsin is an example of a state that temporarily opened up to out-of-state practice. but normally does not allow me to have temporary practice in their borders. So outside the emergency, I would not be able to practice with someone in Wisconsin. And so someone from Wisconsin reaches out to me and says, I want to start therapy with you. Like, should I take that client? Knowing that whenever the emergency is lifted, I will not legally be able to practice with them. So at that point, there's a risk that I will either end up having an inappropriate termination event, an abandonment event with that client because I have to stop, or I'll be breaking Wisconsin law by continuing to work with them. It's not great either way. So it's something you want to consider when you're thinking about taking new clients on during the emergency who are out of state. Most insurance plans are going to cover telebehavioral health for the emergency. Pretty much all of them are doing so. And many are even covering phone sessions, which I think is really good. They should always do that, in my opinion, but that's a whole other issue. So this is another thing about like access to care and abandonment. Once again, the kind of frustration here is now the insurance companies are kind of holding the health of their insureds in their hands, because this is an excellent thing for making sure people can still get access to care without putting themselves at risk of infection by coming to an office. When the insurance companies stop doing emergency coverage, if they stop doing an emergency coverage of telehealth before we have a vaccine or whatever it is that makes the coronavirus really not a threat anymore, like really not a threat. Like if they stop doing the coverage before then, what will you do with your clients who need access to care but are at risk if they get infected and probably shouldn't come to your office, right? So many insurance plans are saying that they're not going to do that. They're going to try not to do that, but some insurance plans are kind of doing that. So you might want to think about, if you're dependent on the emergency insurance coverage, you might want to think about, okay, what's a contingency plan for if some of these insurance plans stop doing this coverage? And my clients, certain clients who are at higher risk of coronavirus infection, if they suddenly don't have telehealth coverage, how am I going to get them help? Am I going to reduce my fees, do a sliding scale? Are we going to do something else? How are we going to, if it's not safe for them to come to the office, how am I going to handle that? So that's something you probably want to think about, or at least have on your mind right now. So here are some must-use resources for that. Once again, the Person-Centered Tech Survey about temporary practice. Also AHIP, which is like a professional association for insurance providers. They actually have a page in which they're trying to keep up to date what all the different insurance companies are doing for emergency coverage. So this is a pretty useful resource for trying to get an idea of what the insurance plans you work with are doing and whether or not they're doing emergency coverage. So go check that out. It is from their professional association, so they're very pro-insurance, but it's still a very useful survey. And that's that. Sorry, I went over the 15 minutes, guys. Sorry about that. Well, let's do some Q&A.
I think that's fine. Really appreciate it. I think you give a like really insightful just diving in. But I really like the comment about the size of the in fact, that's all going back to, so when I do my PhD, one of the research I did was how big in terms of trusting someone, the size of the video reminds me of the day. Like,
some of the data on that comes from Milton himself.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get a free trip to Iceland and Brazil for that research. I feel like I remember good memory. Robert, thank you so much. That was really insightful in there. How about we have basically for audience members, so feel free to start pouring the questions in there. So we have a question from Sheila. She's asking, what about using the headphones in there? Do you have any comments in terms, there's, I guess there's like, versus like bulky headphone, would that make the patient feel weird versus you want to make a tiny, small, like what?
Right. When I do that, I use earbuds. This is my earbuds. They're all tangled up. So it's hard for me to show. Like this doesn't, like this look is a lot less obtrusive than the headphone look. And it works just fine. The other is to consider, the reason why we care about that mostly is to avoid echo, which is actually really important. If you got echo, that's going to ruin your therapy session. But I've got here's my microphone. I got a Yeti.
Oh, nice.
My speaker is right here. Can I? No, it's too short. But if that's a problem, the Yeti is directional. Like it only records in front of it. because I've set it to cardioid, which I was a music major, as you probably guessed, and so I know how microphones work. But the cardioid setting only records in front, and so it's less likely to catch the sound. And as you know, Milton, like of course the software you're using is trying to filter out echo, so that those two things combined, if you can consistently get a setup that doesn't create echo, you won't need them. But with clients, you often want them to wear something. I think another thing is just getting used to headphones as fashion, and just being like I have a certain client that like when I imagine them in my head, I always imagine with these big bulky headphones she always wore for every session. So to me, that's just what she looks like. She's got headphones on.
Yeah, terrific. But I think it's in terms of the audio, I think all the modern these were software, they do the echo cancellation, but sometimes it doesn't work as well. So we definitely recommend, like, I think if you actually have these headset, that you can improve the experience quite a bit. I think another thing is when it's the headset, sometimes it's also where the microphone pick up. I think again, so as Roy, I think you mentioned some of these new iPad is not only great camera, amazing microphone, but if you use some laptop, Western cases, something the laptop, the microphone, the quality just is okay, but it's just a little bit not as good. Just try to get an external thing. And we recommend if you could be close about 1 inch to the left or below your mouth, that just tend to be, you don't need to buy expensive microphone, but just the physical distance just give you a much cleaner experience.
Definitely agree.
Yeah. Another thing, Roy, I'm really excited to share with you is like, we've been friends for such a long time. In fact, during the whole COVID, we felt very bad that our server was just whole overwhelmed. We actually took the free version off of, the good news, we've been like working like crazy, our server teams. We actually, the free VSee, BAA, everything you loved before is back. So,
Oh, okay, I'll ask you more about that later because I thought that there was a limited availability, but I'll get more data about that so we can update our article.
yeah, it was, we felt, to be honest, we felt like just absolutely terrible in there because we are very committed to having free servers as HIPAA compliant, it's HIPAA secure. We signed the BAA, we're very committed to that. Literally, we're just like, our server just hosting it because we actually pay, when I look at how much we're paying Amazon each month, it's an insane number.
No, dude, no judgment at all, zero judgment.
Yeah, no, but we just felt like very guilty in that. But the good news is like there are a lot of things with patches, and now it's free. In fact, the free version is even better. We're actually tossing more features into the free option too. So the idea is just like we want to give something like an even better product too.
Right. I'm like, I use the paid version. Should I be using the free one?
Well, we love free users.
Cool.
So we have a question from Erica asking. So she says she's in Texas. So she's seen the spouse of a soldier that live in another state in North Carolina.
Okay.
And then so she's been seeing this wife before her husband was stationed in Texas, and now she moved to North Carolina. Then the patient covered by Humana military. And then the Humana military, okay, great, do it in real time. So then she was a Humana military said that since the soldier moves so frequently in there, so they have a special provision for soldiers and their family to receive counseling between across states. Can you share, like, do you know anything that for your military family that you might have a different set of rules for like the general mental health?
Yeah, why psychologist in A? That's interesting. Okay, so it's too bad. Okay, it's for temporary practice provisions for non-licensed due to COVID-19. So there might be emergency. Looks like there's probably emergency coverage, but so this is a question I get a lot, is military questions, right? Because one, it's this situation of state siloing really hurts military because they move around. It also hurts military therapists, by the way. Like Oregon's counseling board just passed a rule for temporary licensure for therapists who are in a military family, so that when they move to Oregon, their license will transfer so they can keep practicing. But the challenge here is I can't speak to the details of like when the person's on base and how that works legally, because that's more complicated than I understand, than I can get into. But like they are in North Carolina, and so North Carolina, they're going to have they have a law. Like they're the ones who get to determine it. And so the thing that's I think is really important for clinicians to remember is that insurance coverage and license have absolutely no relationship to each other. So like this is the bit that confuses, is because we have a tendency, the insurance practices have such a strong reliance on what insurance company programs do, that we start to think of the insurance company like it's our licensing board, as if they're the ones giving us permission to practice. And I don't like that dynamic, because insurance companies are private companies, and what they want to, anyway, that's a whole other thing. But like, but it's important to remember that actually, you know, your legal right to practice your profession is actually not related to insurance carriers at all, right? So like, that's a really important thing to remember. But of course, like your ability to practice, because you can't get paid, is a whole other thing, right? So like, I totally get the reason. So North Carolina, according to our survey here, does, you know, we're seeing none of the North Carolina boards in a normal time allow out-of-state licensees to practice there. They have no temporary practice permission.
Okay.
But here, I mean, we're seeing an emergency declaration, so you probably want to check it out. Like I'm I mean, you got to read the emergency declaration, but it seems like there's a good chance that at least during the emergency, that's legal.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much. I get Jack, our audience is asking maybe just a continuation. What about, is there any special consideration for cross-national boundary? Let's say you have a patient who's now like moved to different countries. Now what?
Sometimes it's easier. Okay, so my little history here is one of the reasons I've always stuck with VSee. Is before COVID, my entire telehealth practice was with English speakers in Japan, like, because I used to live in Japan. And when I came back and started training my private practice, I was getting my license, and my supervisor was, why stop seeing people in Japan? There are like no counselors there, especially who speak English. And I did all the due diligence. And so what happens there is a pattern you'll see quite a bit, which is Japan does not regulate psychotherapy or counseling at all, right? They regulate medicine. So if you're a psychiatrist, it would be illegal to practice in Japan without that license, but, or maybe a nurse practitioner, but nursing is very different in Japan. So like and I did a lot of due diligence, talked to a psychiatrist in Tokyo, who was American, and he gave me great advice about, you know, thinking about that, and talked to Japanese police, because Japanese police can't do welfare checks. That's a very apparently kind of North American, maybe European concept of police doing welfare checks. And like, so you got to know, like, if you don't know these things, things could go awry in a really bad way. There are very different risk management considerations when you're working without regulation, like with no regulation. But the advantage is you're not prevented from practicing. That ultimately is a big advantage if there's no regulation. But be aware, it also means you're not recognized. Like the Tokyo psychiatrist who gave me great advice, he made a really good point. He's like, what if your client suicides and the family sues you? Like, is a Japanese court going to think anything of your skills and training? Probably not. Is your malpractice insurance going to cover you against a Japanese court? Guaranteed not. And in general, if you ask your malpractice insurance, they will say they will not cover you if you have any legal proceedings outside the US.
Yeah.
So there's risks you take. And some nations do regulate, and it would be illegal. Finding out can be a pain in the ass. So the process I like to do is find a English-speaking, preferably if you can, like American, maybe an Australian, because Australia is a similar system to ours, like Australians trained clinician, like therapist, who works in that country, and see if you email them and ask, hey, are you willing to help me understand the regulatory environment? Like, do you have to be licensed or certified in order for it to be legal? Like, for example, when I did that for Germany, because I had a client going back to Germany, he just wanted some transitional sessions. I found an American trained psychologist who works in Germany. I asked, they were like, oh yeah, Germany's not going to tell any of their citizens who they can or can't get therapy from. They're just not going to pay you for it because you're not part of their system. And I was like, great, my client's already paying me, no problem. So there's a lot of considerations, but that's the basic idea.
Got it, terrific. So we have a question from Brooke. So she's asking, so she's thinking about moving out of her physical office space and do 100% teletherapy. So she's curious, is like, do you have any data on the consumer's preference between in-person and virtual therapy? Again, this is assuming take the COVID situation out of the equation. Just what do consumers prefer?
I actually don't know much about the data on that at all, to be honest. But we're seeing a ton anecdotally because suddenly everyone needs to go to teletherapy. So what I'm getting kind of goes back to what I said earlier, which was the success of teletherapy for clients. The bigger factor than their preferences is the attitude and leadership of the therapist towards a technology-mediated approach to therapy. So like therapists who found themselves nervous about doing telehealth and kind of timid about it, they would tell us as little as 10% retention of clients before COVID. Therapists who are really confident in it, who've been doing like our programs for a long time and like already felt fine, now they're just going from part to full. Like that they talk about, I found generally the floor on those, this is all anecdotal by the way, but like generally the floor on those was like 75% retention or better, was those who had the confidence. And so that tells me, of course, it's not all confidence. Like I had about 85%. I still got some clients who are like, not interested. I'm like, cool, that's fine. Clients I've been seeing for years, every week. They're like, I'll see you afterwards. That's fine. But you know, it's only about 15%. So that tells you how much of the factor is your ability to lead clients into feeling held and safe with the concept.
Yeah. So Brooke, one thing, by the way, maybe I'll just add on. So this is going back to my PhD research at Stanford, Brooke. So actually, my research was I was studying conversational cues over video, and that was compared to audio-only chat and specific to an in-person experience. And so some of my findings, now in-person, of course, is always amazing in there. But there are certain cases where by these video mediated communication, like it's a technical jargon in the science literature, is certain times actually make it better in the sense of certain scenario, they're more likely to open up to you because it's like the intimacy in there that feel like slightly, it's almost a certain issues, they need to be slightly less intimate for them to open this up. Now the complement to that is the sense of private in there. So for example, right now, like if you just like you turn on the news, all this thing you hear about Zoom hacking this, Zoom this thing, you perhaps saw that the news latest Babylon Health, right? Here's a $2 billion company. Now you could watch other people's conversation on the like consuming that. Like it's just like, so now it's like people bombarded by this. You just say, look, so people are worried about like if I do a session with you, are you using a tool that's trusted? Or did you get the cheapest version out there? And if the people feel like, well, like it's just like, they're sort of in the back of their mind is this conversation will leak out to somewhere else? Like, am I in danger of that? So this is something where you want to be very mindful of that because you want to say, take people's privacy and put yourself in the consumer mind, right? They're listening Zoom hacking, they're doing things, they just sort of assuming it's slightly nervous in there. So you just really want to really address that. Again, this is going back to, by the way, the thing about headset and speaker was interesting is even if audio is not an issue, the fact you wear a headset, you sort of know that audio, there's not someone off the camera that could listen on this conversation. The fact it only going to your ear is allowed to create a more trustworthy environment in there. So others,
Yeah.
So Brooke have a follow-on question. What about, do you have any recommendations for like a remote document signing software? If you have like this 100% virtual practice.
Oh, yes, that's a good question because it's a hard one. You can use okay, so the document signing software is going to be a cloud-based service usually. So there's people behind it, which means to do it with clients, because you probably want your intake documents, that kind of thing. You need a business associate agreement because you need HIPAA compliance. Like you need to remain compliant using the service. That's expensive with document signing. Like DocuSign will do business associate agreements if you pay $5,000 bazillion. So like we find that's not, the document signing services plus HIPAA, we find creates a pretty untenable situation. You can do it if you want to spend the money, but usually the better way to accomplish what you want is to use, if you have a practice management system that does documents and electronic signatures, not all of them do, but more of them are starting to get into that because with COVID times, that is one of the things you need in a telehealth practice is remote ability to do forms. Forgot that on my bullet list. So like more of the practice management systems are adding that. Like Therapy Notes just added that as a beta, where it's in production right now, for example. But there are also 2 ways you can do that a la carte. One is Hushmail Secure Forms. Like Hushmail Secure Forms does electronic signatures now. And Intake Queue is actually this thing that started as just being very robust intake forms, and to become like a full-blown EHR. It's pretty incredible. But which ones, what is a better option for you depends on what you're already using and how much you want to spend on it.
Yeah, thanks for that. And also, by the slightly plug. So for part of the VSee software, we actually have, you can actually upload these forms. We have a signing process for those. So this will also help you potentially.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that, man. I'm gonna go.
So we've been building a lot of stuff. We have one question from the audience. Maybe this is really interesting. Benelia, so she's asking, Joy, what's your opinion of having like a moving desktop for the monitor during a session? So specifically, if as a therapy, you're sort of standing in front of this versus you're sitting down in there, like what? What's your take?
Standing versus sitting? Yeah, what's funny? A lot of people have asked that. Like, people are concerned, like, if I'm standing for the session, what's that going to do? I think it's going to be, because you would never stand if the person comes into your office, because then you have to stand together, right? Yeah. I'm going to bet it's going to be very client by client what it does. Like, I'm going to bet it's not going to be universal, but it will be a change. And as you know, even if I just get a new clock, the clients are going to be like, new clock, what does this mean? My therapist office has changed. But I think one thing about this is that, everything's changing right now about how we do stuff. So transitioning to your standing in the session, I bet would be very different from if you had just done it spontaneously in a more kind of normal time. I think if clients have response to it, it'd be risk for the therapy mill, personally. That would be kind of interesting. It's like, what do you notice about that? Is it funny for you that I'm standing? Do you feel like you need to stand? If you do, why do you feel like you need to I'm a very psychodynamic humanistic therapist. So to me, I'd be like really interested in how the client responds to that. Yeah.
Okay, super in there. But in terms of like a payment piece, I know payments is one of the big pieces in Mr. Havings, right? So if you're using something like a PayPal or some that's not a HIPAA compliant payment system, is that acceptable?
It is with limits, right? Because the HIPAA actually gives an exception to financial services for the very, very specific actions of like moving money around. Because if you think about it, for example, depositing a check, if you take a check to the bank and deposit it, that check is loaded with protected health information.
Yeah.
And you don't have a business associate agreement with the bank.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? HIPAA gives a specific exception to that situation, right? So like, and this, I don't mean the fact that HIPAA allows you to disclose PHI for payment purposes. That is actually also a thing too. I mean, beyond that, there's also an exception for the financial institutions. So like, if a client sends you money by PayPal, you just tell them your PayPal address and they just send you money. That's legit. That's fine under HIPAA. If you like send them a PayPal invoice, PayPal is doing something in addition to just moving money, at which point now in HIPAA territory, and that's technically a violation.
Got it. That's okay. By the way, thank you so much, all the detail. I feel like, of all these telehealth, you're actually, it's a nitty gritty, those subtleties. This is like, I highly recommend that everyone, you gotta go to Roy's website and learn a lot more. And as we, in the final minute, as we wrap up, by the way, apologize to still on the question in the audience we didn't get to, apologize we didn't get to. We'll pass to Roy, we'll post some of the answers after session. But one thing, as we're wrapping up, you shared like so many really interesting things. What is that one thing that's most important on the takeaway for the audience?
I think, the big thing I've been thinking about that's really important is it's all changed. Nothing's going to go back to normal. There's no such thing as going back to normal. And I bet most of you who are watching this have decided by now you don't necessarily want it to. That's what we're getting from our audience, is that like, now that people are getting used to telehealth, they don't necessarily want to go back to what it was before. They want some of their clients in their office. So there's certain clients that would be prefer it, but like, so I think what's going to come with that is, so one of the pieces that's like a standard for telehealth is assessing the client for appropriateness.
Yeah.
Medium of telehealth. And like, I've always found that the way different states or associations express that, I've always found it to be very ham-fisted. Like, it's very too simplistic. Although it's accurate, you do need to do it, but it's too simplistic the way they think about it. Because, for example, we'll say, oh, they phrase it as, is this client appropriate? And I say, well, their appropriateness is partly dependent on what I'm doing. Like, am I skilled enough? Do I have the right setup? Am I able to deliver something to them that doesn't get in the way and make teletherapy useless to them? I'm as much involved in that as they are. It's dyadic. It's not just the person. And so the thing that I've come to realize, I was talking to Deanna Nagel about this on Facebook the other day. You know what? Not everyone's appropriate for in-person therapy either, but no one asks us to assess that, right? There are a lot of people, as you pointed out, that are going to do far better through the video conference, or they're going to do far better with an avatar, which is a whole other thing, right? And so I think the thing we all should be thinking about is therapy is not just sitting in a room talking to each other face to face. It's not anymore, right? And there's so many ways to do it. And when we think about appropriateness of medium and client fit, we need to think of whatever medium we're doing as like, is this appropriate for the client? And like, teletherapy is not secondary to in-person. It's adjacent. And they're both important and useful. Just like ecotherapy, going out into the woods and walking and talking, all these things, they're all adjacent to each other. And I just want us to, I think we're now having to think that way, and now is a moment when I say that people understand what I'm saying. So I'm saying it.
Perfect. And maybe it's just like a rapid fire. I'll shoot out two final questions, and we wrap it. The question is, for example, now you're one of the like industry experts on. You've been doing telehealth for like many years before telehealth become a hobby. What is this like one thing that you believe about telehealth, but the rest of the world do not believe? Yeah.
That online friends are also real friends, and so online clients are real clients. Like I don't know if you, like, when you were a kid, like what kind of stuff. I know clearly you've been in tech a long time. You're a doctor of computer science, but like when I was a kid, I was 14. Like, it was before the web, right? Or actually, like, as the web was just being made, basically. And like, I had a modem and a computer, and my computer would make phone calls to other computers in my local area, because if I made a long distance call, it would cost money, right? And we did BBSs, just like you saw in the movie War Games. And I made a lot of friends that way. And it's not because I didn't have real life friends. I had friends everywhere. And the friends I made there, I later met when I changed high schools.
Yeah.
And they were still my good friends. They were my best friends at the new high school. Why? Because we were already friends. And so like, if you don't grow up understanding that, then you don't grow up learning how to modulate your body and your mind's responses to the person you're seeing on the screen. And if that's not how you've grown up, that's okay, but be aware of that fact that you can modulate, you can change it by learning to, like, I'm seeing Milton, I know Milton, I've never met you in person, but you're my friend. I know you. If I met you in person, it would be different, but not less than.
Yeah, I wonder. Then the final question is, now the COVID is definitely making a lot of change in the healthcare in there. And if you can get to pick one permanent change, like, fast, what would be that one permanent change you want COVID to bring about?
It would be that, I'm trying to figure out how to, I'm kind of reiterating what I've already said, basically, which is that, like, the one change that it brings about is that every therapist is used to the idea that therapy has multiple ways to happen. That it can be sitting in a room, it can be on a screen, it can be out walking. And if you decide that you just want to go back to sitting in a room because that works better for you, fantastic. But at least COVID helped educate you instead of you doing it from a place of fear or lack of understanding or naivete. If you did it because you did it and you're educated and you understand and you know that's what's going to work better, that makes me happy.
Okay, great, terrific. Right, thank you so much. I know we ran out a little time, but you're just like an encyclopedia inside. And I'm really excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Right.
Thank you, Bill. I really appreciate it.
Okay.